Okay, today we're doing As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. There's a really great author review on him. Author reviews are always good, but especially on Allen, his background plays a lot into why this book was written and how. And then we've got some other posts about some little known articles. And on his author review, I've linked a couple biographies for you. One that was written right after his death. Anyway, very valuable to understanding As a Man Thinketh. Now, this is a book that is, I don't know if I should say loved and hated. It's kind of controversial sometimes. You're going to find it in the self-help section. Except that, and Allen can seem, well, it's interesting because sometimes people think of him as a relativist. They think, well, he didn't really have any absolutes and it was just, you know, just your thoughts control you, and I don't know. It's been interesting to discuss this with several different groups because sometimes the discussion is all about all the incredible things people learned, and sometimes it's just nitpicking the things people hated about what he had to say. Because he makes some really broad, sweeping statements. One of them, for example, is that all suffering is wrong, that if your thoughts were always exactly and precisely what they should be, that you would never suffer. And people sometimes struggle with that kind of broad, sweeping conclusion that he makes. But Allen can see that this is kind of how I answer that concern sometimes. If people are gonna err on the side of taking a lot of responsibility for their thoughts and really trying to fine-tune them and be very careful and meticulous about what they're thinking and really take control of their own minds, or if they're gonna brush it aside and say, oh, people are lucky and they're just in the right place at the right time, or, you know, all this thing about all suffering and I don't agree, and I don't think it's that absolute. Which side are most people going to err on? It's obvious they're going to err on the side of not taking enough responsibility for their thoughts. So I think for Allen, one of the motivations was, let's get people to take some serious responsibility for what's going on in their heads. And he really wanted to empower people. He wanted them to understand just how much control they could have, and he spends a lot of time on circumstances. And one of my very favorite things in this book is the idea that you have created the circumstances that you find yourself in, whether you like it or not. It's a reflection of the thoughts that you have. And that sounds so harsh to people, but when accepted for what it is, I think maybe with, I don't know, a little bit of variableness, I don't know, but when accepted and taken responsibility for, then it's incredibly liberating. I really think that Covey's principle of proactivity is really in harmony with this concept, because when I take responsibility, when I look around at my environment and I say, I contributed to being where I am right now, I am responsible for thinking thoughts that created this, then in that moment I can fix it. And before that moment, I'm just a victim. And Allen saw a lot of people that were living lives of victimhood, that wanted to blame circumstances and other people and other people's choices. And he saw how crippling it was for them and how they were disempowered. It's interesting too, when a few years after Allen died, this book was not considered his best work. It was not what he was known for a long time. And today, it's really kind of the only book on the shelves by James Allen. I'm not exactly sure why that is. I've only read excerpts from some of his other books, and I've read some of his articles. But it's interesting to ponder why this book of all of his books is the one that's remained. There's a beautiful ending here. He says, "Tempest-tossed souls, wherever ye may be, under whatsoever conditions ye may live, know this. In the ocean of life, the isles of blessedness are smiling, and the sunny shore of your ideal awaits your coming. Keep your hand firmly upon the helm of thought. In the bark of your soul reclines the commanding master. He does but sleep, wake him. Self-control is strength. Right thought is mastery. Calmness is power. And that is beautiful. One of the things you also need to know, and if you do one of our book groups programs and learn a little bit more about the difference between poetry and prose, one of the important differences is that poetry is idealistic. It's not pragmatic. And this book is poetry. That's one very important. It's in a self-help section, but it's poetry, and most self-help is prose. And so that's one of the reasons for the absolute concrete statements, because Alan, and you'll understand better why this is the case when you go through the author review, but he was an idealist and he wanted to show us the ideal. And so he doesn't make excuses, and he doesn't always make room for, he doesn't make a lot of elbow room, because he wants us to take him very literally, and he wants us to strive for the ideal and to take complete command over our lives. It's mostly ideas, right? Like he's just planting ideas. It's very short, it's easy to read, but it's deep. So you'll want to stop a lot and think and take some notes. I mean, I've got a million markings all over my book. I got all kinds of questions and thoughts and I learn new things every time, and it makes me a better person every time, because I think I can do better there. I can do better. He tells there are a couple stories, not very long. One story is about a man who, it's been a while since I've read it, so I can't remember all the details, but he comes to believe that maybe he could furnish his home. Like maybe, I think it starts with a rug. I'm trying to remember if it starts with a rug or a couch. You'll know what I mean when you read it, but he said he imagines that there could be a rug, and eventually he's able to find a way to get a rug, and then, oh, I can have a couch, and eventually his home is all beautifully furnished because he's changed the way that he thinks. It's the kind of book that could be seen as absolutes or relative. It's often read as relative. Like what people adopt from it is this idea that, oh, if I just think it, if I just believe it, it's just going to magically happen. That was not what Alan was about. That's why it's important that you look at the author review and read a couple other things by him as well. He was about God. He was about absolutes. He was about very hard work. But he knew that thought and the mind was a critical element of that, and that reason that we need to train our reason and be more in control of ourselves. So that's As a Man Thinketh. Great discussion book. Highly recommend that you read it and think about it in terms of context of your own worldview, your own religious views, your own belief systems, but know that there are some absolutes and concretes. He talks about law a lot in this book because he believed in law. Anyway, enjoy. See you next time.